Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Currently Speaking, the podcast of the Current Consulting Group. I'm Bill Current, president and founder of the Current Consulting Group. We're glad to have you with us. Now, in 2026, the Current Consulting Group will conduct its 28th annual survey of the drug testing industry. We'll also conduct our 10th annual survey of employers and drug testing. Now, these surveys provide valuable insights for employers and providers into the trends that shape how drug testing is conducted and the external factors that are influencing those trends. According to Current Consulting Group's 2025 Employer Drug Testing Survey, a slow but sure trend is emerging: the shrinking percentage of employers that are including marijuana in their drug test panel. Now, why are we seeing this trend? Why is the percentage shrinking a little bit every year? In reality, it's due to several issues, but one of them, and a significant one, is because I believe employers misunderstand just how dangerous marijuana is, especially for the workplace. Marijuana is the most dangerous drug, according to one of the nation's foremost medical experts, Dr. Marc Siegel. In an article published by Spectator, he said, quote, "Weed is the most dangerous drug in America. The main reason for this is the fact that most people don't think it is. In fact, they typically think just the opposite. They believe not only that pot is safe, but also that it has true medicinal qualities. Little do they know that those benefits are barely worth the paper you wrap your joint in," end quote. Unfortunately, too many employers fall into that category of either believing that marijuana is safer than it really is, or they just don't want to know who the marijuana users are in their company. And as such, we're seeing a drop in the percentage of employers who say they test for marijuana. Now, in the Current Consulting Group employer survey, when we asked, "What is your company's position on testing for marijuana?" 73% said they plan to continue testing for marijuana, which was down from 77% in each of the past 2 years' employer surveys. In our survey, the percentage of employers who admit that they have dropped marijuana from their panel increased from 9% in 2023 to 12% in 2025. And additionally, and perhaps most telling, 11.6% in the 2025 survey said they were not sure what to do about testing for marijuana, and that was up from 9% just 2 years before. To better understand the importance of testing for marijuana, it's important to understand why employers conduct drug testing in the first place. In our survey, when we asked employers why establish and maintain a drug testing program, 78% said to promote workplace safety. And that's good because according to Quest Diagnostics, a leading provider of drug testing, quote, "The percentage of employees in the general U.S. workforce testing positive for marijuana following an on-the-job accident increased to its highest level in 25 years," in their 2022 report. In the Current Consulting Group survey, when employers were asked, "What benefits does your company realize from drug testing?" 84%, the number one response, said it improves safety in the workplace. So let's review what we know. The number one reason employers conduct drug testing is to improve workplace safety. And the number one benefit employers say they get from drug testing is it improves workplace safety. And post-accident positivity for marijuana is at its highest level in 25 years. And yet, according to our survey, 12% of employers have already stopped testing for marijuana, 3% said they're considering dropping marijuana, and 12% admit they're not sure what to do. Now, that percentage, 12% that have dropped marijuana, may not be the same with every drug testing provider. In fact, I've talked to people from some of the largest drug testing providers, and they believe the percentage is a little bit lower. But if we had asked this question 20 years ago, everybody would have been testing for marijuana. So there's definitely a trend. Now, the survey's results are all the more perplexing when you consider the fact that when employers were asked how concerned they were about workplace safety due to the legalization of marijuana, 59% said very concerned, and 43% said a little concerned, for a total of 93% who are concerned about the legalization of marijuana's effect on workplace safety. You may also find it of interest that 51% said marijuana legalization causes them to be very concerned about productivity. 49% said it causes them to be very concerned about finding quality employees. 42% said they were concerned about absenteeism, and another 42% said they're also very concerned about turnover. And then finally, 38% said they were very concerned about marijuana's effect on employee morale. A whopping 48% said they were very concerned, and 29% said they were a little concerned about legal marijuana's effect on their company's reputation, which is, of course, in part how companies attract good quality employees to come work for them. And yet the percentage of employers who say they plan to continue testing for marijuana dropped from 77% to 73% between 2023 and 2025. So given the level of concern about marijuana's effect on everything from safety and productivity to employee morale and a company's reputation, why would an employer discontinue testing for marijuana? Well, we asked that question too, and here's what employers in our survey told us. It makes it more difficult to hire new people, 27%. We're concerned about lawsuits, legal liability if we test for marijuana, 22%. Although I'll point out that only 3% said they've ever faced a legal challenge. Testing for marijuana is not permitted in the states or cities where we do business, 12%. Actually, testing for marijuana is permitted on all 50 states, though it may be heavily restricted in some states, like New York, for example. And then finally, what employees do on their own time is not our company's business, 25%. 25% of employers said what they do on their own time is not our business. Well, let's analyze that, what their own time means, and determine if using marijuana during that time could impact the workplace. We can agree that the hours just before employees actually start their work shift is part of their own time, including the time they spend commuting to work, right? In a survey of 1,000 employees who admitted to being illicit drug users, so these are people with jobs who also use drugs, 28% said they get high on their way to work. Wow. A 2021 analysis of 80 scientific studies from around the world concluded that the window of impairment from cannabis use is between 3 and 10 hours. The report stated that impairment may last up to 10 hours if high doses of THC are consumed orally. A more typical duration of impairment, however, is 4 hours when lower doses of THC are consumed via smoking or vaporization, and simpler tasks are undertaken, such as those using cognitive skills like reaction time or sustained attention and working memory. This impairment may extend up to 6 or 7 hours, according to the report, if higher doses of THC are inhaled and complex tasks such as driving are assessed. So, if an employee smokes a couple of joints in his car on the way to work, and marijuana impairment can last 3 to 10 hours after usage, it is likely this person will be impaired at least to some extent while working. And if he is performing complex tasks like driving, the impairment could lead to very negative consequences. As such, employers should care about employees using marijuana on their own time, considering that their own time includes the hours and minutes leading up to the workday. An impairment from marijuana use can linger into the first several hours of an employee's shift. Another 5% said they do not believe in testing for marijuana. This is a good one too, and here's why. As an employer, small business owner, or chief executive of a large corporation, it doesn't really matter what you personally believe about marijuana. Within the bounds of your company's objectives for being in business, your primary concern should be what will make our company successful, or that you make payroll each month, or that your shareholders are getting an acceptable return on investment, and that your customers like doing business with you. I've heard some people, employers, say that it is hard enough to hire employees and marijuana testing just makes the pool of applicants tougher to fill. Marijuana testing will certainly limit the pool of available applicants by eliminating those who are not qualified. Wouldn't an employer want to hire only those who are qualified to handle safety-sensitive work or perform tasks that require accuracy and/or good customer service? Here's a personal story that illustrates my point. One day, a man came to my door at my home in Florida to ask if I would hire his company to trim the very tall palm trees in my front yard. I glanced over his shoulder and realized the palms indeed needed trimming, so I said yes. We agreed on a price, and he said he would be back the following morning at 8 a.m. to start the project. The next morning, as promised, he stood at my front door to inform me that he and his crew of 6 workers were ready to start. As soon as I opened the door, however, I was blown away by the strong smell of marijuana coming from the direction of this person who stood just maybe 6 to 8 feet in front of me. Clearly, he and his crew had been smoking marijuana in their trucks on the way to my house, their workplace for the day, getting high in preparation for climbing up tall extension ladders to trim the many palm trees on my property. I quickly imagined what it might be like for someone high on marijuana to be trying to maintain his balance on a somewhat wobbly extension ladder 20 feet in the air with a heavy gas-powered chainsaw in his hands. It took approximately 2 seconds for me to realize that all the liability in that moment fell on my shoulders and my general liability homeowner's insurance policy, which I was going to need when one of those workers fell to his death because he was high on marijuana, trying to control a handheld chainsaw standing on a ladder 20 feet in the air with his head tilted all the way back, staring into the sun. With that vision in mind, I informed the gentleman that I would not let his crew work on my property under those circumstances. I also determined that I would never agree to work with that company again. Hence, they not only lost my business that day, but they lost me as a customer forever because it was too important to them to get high on marijuana on their way to work that morning. Now, some employers actually believe that conditions in their workplaces improved or were at least unchanged after they discontinued testing for cannabis. In our survey, 55%, actually down from 82% in 2024, said they had seen no change in overall work performance since dropping marijuana. Now, maybe work performance wasn't so hot to begin with, right? 27%, up from 14%, said it has been easier to find new people to hire. And 6%, up from 3%, said employee morale has improved. However, 8% said morale has actually declined. This may explain, at least partially, why marijuana is no longer the number one drug employers test for nowadays. When asked as part of the survey, what drugs do you include in your drug test panel, 90% said marijuana, which was less than those who said amphetamines, 96%, cocaine, 95%, and opioids, 94%. In fact, phencyclidine, or PCP, a drug many employers and drug testing providers have scoffed at for being part of the federal drug test panel, was right behind marijuana at 83%. Despite the ongoing campaign to legalize marijuana and the fact that more than half of Americans live in a state where recreational marijuana use is legal, it doesn't change the fact that marijuana is a very dangerous drug, more dangerous than some people think. And for employers whose top priority should be maintaining safe and productive workplaces so their employees can thrive and their companies can remain profitable, choosing not to test applicants and employees for marijuana is intentionally choosing to hire and employ more marijuana users who tend to be less safe and less productive than their non-using coworkers. And many marijuana users admit that they get high on their way to work or while on the job, which means they are very likely impaired while working, which is perhaps the most dangerous thing about marijuana. Even the leading voice in favor of marijuana legalization, NORML, agrees that marijuana can be harmful. This is a quote directly from their website. Quote, "Nonetheless, cannabis should not necessarily be viewed as a harmless substance. Consuming cannabis will alter mood, influence emotions, and temporarily alter perception. So consumers are best advised to pay particular attention to their emotional state, and setting, environment, prior to using it. It should not be consumed immediately prior to driving or prior to engaging in tasks that require certain learning skills, such as the retention of new information." I think that's enough said about that. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Currently Speaking. You can find past episodes at our website at currentconsultinggroup.com, where the podcasts are available on all the major podcast platforms or on our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Currently Speaking.